It gladdens me to know that Odin prepares for a feast. This hero that comes into Valhalla does not lament his death. I shall not enter Odin's hall with fear. My death comes without apology, and I welcome the Valkyries to summon me home.
The Viking Advance.
Chapter 3.
The Norse gods who ruled the sea provided an excellent reason for caution. Aegir and his wife Ran were personifications of the ocean's capacity for both good and ill. When properly propitiated, Aegir could offer up the riches of the sea, but when angered, he could make even the stoutest Viking quail. In Fridthof's saga, it was suggested that the wise sailor should always carry a piece of gold, so that if caught in a storm, he would not be empty-handed when he drowned and came into the presence of Aegir's wife. He could cross her palm with gold, thus assuring his entrance into Valhalla. A good captain was to see to it that all his men had his offering of gold, even if it meant distributing it from his own purse. Aegir's 9 daughters were the waves of the sea, called by such forbidding names as Howler and Grasper, and no Viking wanted to spend the night in their arms. The thunder god Thor also needed to be placated by Vikings at sea because he controlled the climate, and whether a sailor ended up in the grips of Aegir or Ran and their daughters often depended upon Thor's having to be appeased by sacrifices before the voyage or proper oaths from the helmsman position. In addition to the hazards of the weather, ocean voyages posed more prosaic problems, particularly when knarrs were venturing out loaded with emigrants on a colonizing expedition to the countless islands off the coast of Scotland, to the shores of Ireland, or later, to the Newfoundlands across the wild northern waters. That the Vikings succeeded in these epic voyages was attributable not only to their magnificent blue water sailing vessels, they were superlative navigators as well, venturing boldly out to explore the unknown and then repeating their voyage almost casually, with a certainty of direction that was nothing short of phenomenal. What lay behind all Viking seafaring was the Norseman's instinct for the sea, a sense that seemed uncanny to the landsman, but it was in reality a prodigious body of hard-earned knowledge accumulated through centuries of nautical life. The Viking drew great meaning from the look of cloud formations, from changes in winds and wave patterns, from ocean currents and ground swells, from sea fogs, watercolors, and temperatures. He could read information from the habits of seabirds, was alert to the overwater migration of certain land birds, and tracked the movements of fish and whales that came down from the north. A seasoned Viking navigator could tell whether he was approaching the Faroe Islands by the swell building up over the banks surrounding the group. He would know he was nearing Greenland because of the abrupt change in the temperature of the water as he entered the polar current, by the pronounced change in the water's color from ocean blue to green, and by the occasional presence of drift ice. The Vikings were master of the relentless currents that swirled about in the North Atlantic and Arctic waters. The Norwegian current surged powerfully up the coast of Norway toward the Lofoten Islands, tending to carry ships in its path speedily towards Iceland. From Iceland, the ships setting a westward course were carried along by the Irminger current, and then whisked southward by the Greenland current. Finally, they were propelled down the coast of North America by the Labrador current. Prevailing winds generally helped them on their way as well, blowing northward between Norway and Iceland, and southward between Iceland and Greenland. The elaborately decorated wind vanes on the prows and mastheads testified to the sailors' keen sensitivity to every errant puff, for it was only by taking full advantage of both the wind and the currents that the rapid ocean passages could be made without tragedy. In a later day, mariners would have magnetic compasses and sophisticated speed-measuring devices to help them navigate with precision. But in Viking times, the compass had not yet reached Western Europe from the Orient. As far as for computing speed, the only way the Vikings might have managed that would be to toss a chip of wood into the sea and count how long it took to travel the vessel's length to the stern, or by watching bubbles float by. Viking seafarers employed a primitive celestial navigation to help them measure course and distance. At night, Polaris, the North Star, was the primary heavenly indicator. The star was usually visible overhead, circling tightly around the pole below, and thus a boon beyond price to mariners. On clear nights, it required only a method of determining the angle of Polaris off the bow to determine a rough course. By holding a steady 90-degree angle from Polaris, for example, the Vikings could be sure that they were heading directly east or west. In later years, this would be known as latitude sailing, and its ramifications for the Vikings was enormous, particularly on their great western voyages of exploration and trade across hundreds of miles of open ocean. No one venturing down the coast of Scandinavia could fail to notice, as well, that the altitude of Polaris from horizon would decrease as the vessel sailed southward, and that the reverse would hold true on the journey northward. Thus, by measuring the altitude of this star, Viking navigators could determine with considerable accuracy how far north or south they had traveled. Employing the sun as a navigational tool was somewhat more complex. In the depths of winter, when the sun scarcely rose at all, it was useless as a directional beacon. But then again, only the most foolhardy Viking ventured far from land at this time of year, with its bitter cold and monstrous storms. In the summertime, however, when the sun was above the horizon for a great part of the day and night, the Vikings made full use of it. As was the case with Polaris, the height of the sun as it arced across the sky would change as the vessel sailed south or north. On a southerly heading, the altitude of the sun would increase, and the reverse would also hold true for any northerly course. The sun could also indicate the direction as it traveled from east to west. To measure these values and apply them to navigation, the Vikings devised 3 ingenious navigational instruments that they called the sunboard, the sunstone, and the sun shadow board. The sunboard appears to have been a bearing dial on which were marked compass points, radiating from a hole in the center. With the help of a pointer mounted on the dial, the Vikings were able to take a course bearing from the sun as it rose in the east or set in the west, and to maintain a course by simply checking this crude triangulation each day. From Viking accounts, it is known that Norse navigators were accustomed to also taking a sighting at noon when the sun reached north-south meridian. Thus, although he had no magnetic compass, the Viking could make a reasonably accurate determination of his compass bearings each day. Under overcast skies or in dense fog, the Viking made use of a remarkable calcite mineral crystal named Cordierite, the Norse Sunstone, found in Scandinavia and in Iceland. When a crystal of Cordierite is held at right angles to the plane of polarized light from the sun, the crystal instantly changes from yellow to dark blue. Probably first used as a decorative element in Norse jewelry, the sunstone was a real boon to Viking seafarers. Even in thick fog or under a woolen sky, a navigator in mid-ocean could locate the exact position of the invisible sun by rotating a chunk of Cordierite until it suddenly turned dark blue. Since it produced the same color change even when the sun was as much as 7 degrees below the horizon, the navigator could continue to take sightings after sunset. But for general course settings during daylight hours, the Vikings relied most heavily on the sun shadow board. This device, which allowed them to determine their latitude and then sail along that latitude over vast reaches of ocean to their destination, appears to have been a wooden disc marked with concentric circles that were rough equivalent to latitudes. In the center of the disc was a vertical staff similar to one of a sundial that could be pushed up and down to make it taller or shorter according to the position of the sun in the sky. When the staff was set at proper height for the sun's declination around mid-August, for example, the shadow cast by the sun at noon, when it reached its zenith, would fall in a particular circle. By keeping the sun's shadow on that same circle each noon, the navigator could maintain his latitude. And if the shadow fell to one side of the circle or the other, the helmsman could tell how much he should steer north or south to get back on course. To keep the instrument level at sea, a sailor was assigned to hold it floating in a bowl of water. The sun shadow board became the heart of Viking daylight latitude sailing, and all directions given to Norse navigators concerned themselves with reckonings to and from pivotal points of geography where latitude sailing could begin. A vessel would sail roughly north or south as it reached a pivotal point, and then it would sail east or west to its destination, or to another pivotal point. The Norsemen were aided enormously by the location of Scandinavia. The latitude of the Horns in Iceland was the same as that of Trondheim Fjord in Norway. From Bergen, Norway, a ship could sail on the same latitude to the Shetland Islands and Cape Farewell in Greenland. The Orkney Islands were on the same latitude as Stavanger, Norway. By holding to any given Polaris angle or sun shadow length for the duration of the voyage, a Viking sailor could maintain his prescribed course to within just a few miles of his destination. At that point, he could watch for natural phenomena. Perhaps a darker variety of the fulmar petrel, known to inhabit the waters around southern Iceland, or an increase in puffins, which would indicate the proximity of the Faroe Islands with their vast colonies of seabirds. Thus did the Vikings construct their magnificent ships, and for centuries navigate them by sun and star across the northern seas and oceans. The Western world would not see mariners to equal or surpass them until the Middle Ages passed into the Renaissance, and Portugal's Prince Henry the Navigator ushered in the great age of exploration at the close of the 15th century.